Today we're going to speak of the future of work. And to do that, I'm going to do a brief introduction. Gary and Christine, they might come to our screens right now. As you may have already read their bios, they're amazing people, very well prepared. And not only that, but they have a small crystal ball that they are always looking into the future of how things might work. I'm just kidding, but it's something that we are always looking at as to what happens in the future. How is this going to come up? Our work with young leaders, meaning people who are still defining what they want in the future, how they're looking at their opportunities, really brings us the opportunity to talk about work. What does that mean? And I'll kick off the conversation really with a very simple question around the future of work. How do you guys see the future of work in the next 10 to 15 years? I know these young adults who are craving to their next steps are trying to define what are those based on what they want to do. What is their life expectation from their personal perspective, but also from the contextual perspective, right? So, Gary and Christine, if you guys want to take over a bit of that question, and we can start working from there.
Gary, you want to start?
Sure. Excuse me. Sure, I'll jump in. So first off, it's wonderful to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you all. Really looking forward to a great conversation with Javier and Christine. So Javier, you set the goal. It's to talk about. So I'll tell you some of the things that are sort of pretty likely big trends that we can all anticipate. But I want to make sure, and that we just keep coming back again and again for each individual person. You're one person. You have to find or create meaningful, well-paid work for that one person. So we can talk about a lot of these big trends and things that are changing, but I think it's very important to be able to take a deep breath, to make sure that you're understanding the ways that you can find or create meaningful. And a lot of times these macro trends can affect, big numbers of people, but you only have to actually do that for one. So, but some of the common things that people talk about nowadays, we know that there's certain things pretty likely to continue into the next decade, a decade and a half. We know that there will continue to be very rapid technological change. Now, that doesn't mean all of us have to go into technology fields, but more and more work will have technology involved in it. And those technologies are probably going to keep on going very, very rapidly. 30 years ago, it was this thing called the internet. Now there's this thing called artificial intelligence and generative AI. And tomorrow it's going to be different technologies. So really what's helpful is to be able to just understand how you might be able to leverage some of these technologies in your own learning, in your own work, take advantage of opportunities. Second, it's often common that there are going to be places where there are jobs or work that's available, and there are plenty of people that are needed that aren't yet working in that field. So in countries around the world, and especially in America, these are often called workforce mismatches. That is, there's a big need for people in some area, and there's just not enough people that are learning to do it. So right now, they're probably short about 1 million people in the healthcare arena. And that's because people like me keep getting older and older. We're going to need more and more care. We need about 30 to 40,000 construction workers. There's all these different work opportunities. And then the question is, are those things that fascinate you? Are those things that interest you? But very, very likely that those mismatches will continue. And there will often be different jobs that if you could learn pretty quickly how to be able to meet that need, you would be able to do that work in a relatively short period of time. So I'm going to stop there. I think there's lots of other trends that we can talk about, but Christine, I'm interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, that's a great setup. And it makes me think about like the big questions that I probably should have been asking myself when I was, in high school and approaching all those choices. And I just remember the big thing that I felt was that pressure to pick the right thing, right? And this is before all these terms were coming on. Like, I don't know if anyone even you still hear something like Internet of Things, right? Is when objects were starting to get code in them, right? And now we're just running away with generative AI, and that's yet another term, right? And so I think there's this pressure that people feel to already like get into that slipstream, and that they're going to miss out if they choose some path that is, let's say, overemphasizes the arts. I'm just giving that as like a random example, right? And to me, that goes even to a more fundamental question of the shift from, is work about finding a job, or is it about thinking of how your career knits together your interests, your skills, and your passions, right? I think one thing that is very hard to discern, and we talked a little bit about this when we were leading up to this call, but hard to discern when you're younger is what exactly are your skills that will actually matter in the workplace, right? You have no conception of what work is really going to be like. I come from a world of startups as well, where when you go into them, you actually have no conception of what's going to happen like year by year. And so what the only thing you can really do is kind of bring your best instincts, a strong desire to work, and some degree of like humility and humbleness, right? To be open and curious, to absorb whatever the world is kind of signaling back to you. So I think it is a very exciting time, and that there's some balance to be achieved now between like finding the job that makes your ends meet and gives you enough means, right? But ultimately, you're forging that path that has many more degrees of freedom now than we used to have, and technology is one of those, right? But it is just one of those amongst many, that some of are personal and some are external.
That's great, and I think in both perspectives, Gary and Christine's there's so much to unpack, right? And Gary, to your first part of the conversation, where trends of the needs, basically of labor needs, you spoke about a high demand of health, and then healthcare, construction, and all these things. But then there's also this contrast of AI and technological, tools that are going to be out there who may substitute these or not. But a couple of questions here. One, as we plan for our future, as young adults planning for a future, and we have this dream of, oh, when I grow up, I really want to be working from a hammock in the Bahamas, because I now have all this amazing AI resources that will allow this for me to do, right? But versus the needs, where we're seeing the other trends, which is now construction is high labor intensity, right? Or healthcare, which we need the people who takes care of the elders, and so on. So I think there's a contrast there as to how to figure out this place where I can fit. And kind of what Christine was saying is like, hey, but I think I need to go through a design process where my choices are going to be starting defining myself as to where I want to be placed in the future, right? So I don't know if that resonates, and figure out this place of the needs versus the choices I have, and also the aspiration that is happening, right, in this process. So if you can speak a bit to that, that would be great.
So great question. So first off, Christine, this is exactly accurate. That when we're young, we kind of don't know the rules. My father, who was a recovering minister, he ended up writing the world's career manual, a book called What Color's Your Parachute? And then he wrote a book called The Three Boxes of Life. And he said, let's go, when you're young, nobody tells you this. So I'm going to tell you now. There are three phases that many people, especially in the Western world, follow. You have this big chunk of learning, we call that school. And we have this big chunk of work, we often call those jobs. And then there's this, your parents are retired, and maybe you're, when you hopefully we have the time when we're older. And my father said many, many years ago, he said, well, really, we should be sort of turning them on their side. It should be lifelong learning, lifelong work, and lifelong fun and leisure. But the rules in each of these different arenas, they're different. You learn school, you get really, really good at school, then you get thrown into the pool in the work box. And often nobody tells you how those rules work. So it turns out are kind of exactly what both Christine and Javier were talking about is there's really two things going on. It's what is it that motivates you, that fascinates you, the kinds of problems that you like to solve. Christine was talking about curiosity. Are there things that just draw you like the North Star or the Southern Cross sailors used to use to navigate? Are there things that just fascinate you and you want to learn more about? And the more you can inventory your skills, interest, the better you're going to be at figuring out the kinds of problems that you want to solve. But that has to match up with what the needs are in work. And sometimes we tend, when we're young, to sort of default to the things that are right in front of us. So if somebody's telling you you should be a social media influencer, well, turns out that's a really hard job. First off, it's hard to do and to maintain. And secondly, it's hard to keep going at. So it's a lot of work. It's really important to understand. So what is work? How does it work? What are the kinds of problems people solve? Talk to people who are doing the different kinds of work that you're interested in. And also understand where, as we were talking about, some of the demand might be. Where do you think some of the needs will be going forward? And chances are really good that if you can match those things up, the things that you're most passionate about, you're fascinated by, you're curious about, and then some of the places where there are needs, that's actually how we make decisions as human beings. Intrinsic motivation, and some of it's extrinsic motivation. It's where people want us, or where they tap us on the shoulder, or where there's an opportunity to do work.
So that speaks a lot to Gary. That speaks a lot to this sense of awareness, I guess, as to how you design your future, how present you are with your passion, and the needs of of the environment, but also I think there's also a third, maybe a pressure point of your family, right, and the context, because I know also that is something important that we're dealing. It's kind of like the white elephant in the room, or the elephant in the room that nobody speaks of, but there's all this pressure from family, parents, friends, social, etc. That you're also trying to address that, right? So you're trying to balance all these elements, and trying to figure it out. And I think that's the big question: how do I figure out all these elements, right? My guess is also that there's some sort of uncomfort, right, in this process, which we need to. I guess that there's also a point of saying, "Hey, let's feel comfortable with the unknown." And what does it take to get to that point?
Yeah. Javier, I'm still thinking about actually your examples of, um, well, I guess it's both of your examples in construction and healthcare. And it reminds me though also of the sense that like you feel like you might make the wrong decision when you're young, right? Or the pressure to make that right decision. And one thing I also just wanted to say is that you're going to be uncomfortable with many of things that happen early in work anyway. It's actually not dependent on whether you made the right decision or not, because you're going to uncover all these things where it's going to force you to grow, right? And so if there's concern that going to something like construction is not the right thing because it's not technology forward enough, you know again, taking a page from my world of startups, we see amazing stories of people's lived experiences turning into some just incredible venture, maybe like 5 to 10 years down the road in their career, because they really deeply understood a problem out there where they experienced that earlier in their life. Some of it's from their families, some of it's from an early job that they had. And it ultimately actually comes together into something else that then goes on to transform the world or their community or something meaningful to them in an incredible way that if they hadn't had those earlier experiences, they wouldn't be able to bring that same level of insight and intelligence and insider knowledge, really. So I think there's just something to be said for even just valuing the uncomfortable early, maybe you think they're wrong, like jobs or experiences you have early on, because they're if you have that will and that courage and that intention to try to transform the world, it will come back. You're going to knit it together into something, right? And it's not like you have to make every right step along the way. I think it's a continual evolution. Like career, at least to me these days, is about taking everything I've seen and done and constantly trying to repackage it into something better for the causes I care about. So I really favor these more long-term views, that, again, to Gary's point, so hard to see early, right? Because you might go for what's right in front of you, but also don't worry if the thing in front of you doesn't feel quite right. Sometimes you have to experience it and see what it turns into.
Right. I think that coming from the entrepreneur side of things, also, I think there's this process of rapid prototyping, right? There's this idea of fail soon to succeed fast. So give yourself the opportunity to fail at this point, and test yourself in different environments. And what you're doing is you're just simply building that that knowledge of what you like and what you don't like. It's better to do it while you're early in the career path versus when you're late, right? I guess from a growth perspective, as you're putting it, Christine. Gary, what do you think about this?
Absolutely, great insights. So let me just, I'm not going to oversimplify, but let me sort of distill, what work is. Remember, again, that many of us, especially when we're young, we don't know how the rules work, right? And so it turns out that when we're young, when we're born, we all become kind of trial and error machines. Nobody gave you a user manual for your life, right? You had to sort of figure it out. And so it turns out problem solvers. That's kind of what humans do, right? So work is essentially, think of it as solving problems. How do we solve problems? We have human skills. We apply our skills to solving problems. And a lot of times that's a trial and error process to figure out, well, how does all that match up? What kind of problems am I good at? What problems do I like trying to solve? And then hopefully over time, what you find out is that there's a couple different sort of motivations for the kinds of problems that you either like to solve or that you are really good at solving. Up, right? Sometimes you're really always a match. Sometimes you're really good at a topic, a subject in school, but you don't necessarily love it. It's naturally good at it. And there's others that you love, but you haven't yet gotten really good at it. That's often true with music or art. We have to really develop a lot of skills to be able to feel that we're sort of attaining the level that we want. So it's really important to give yourself permission, as Christine was saying, to make mistakes, to try stuff out. There's a find inspiring for me, and I'll just see if it's inspiring for you folks. But we often, when I'm talking to a lot of people about not just the long-term future of work, but tomorrow, like how they're thinking about work, is that people tend to have sort of four sort of ways of thinking about it. It's what you can get paid for. So that's like the first thing. Christine was saying, sometimes you just have to do that cruddy job just to get money and learn how to, how to work. And then hopefully somebody at some point older and say, you know what, if you get really good at this work, you get paid better. Oh, okay. So this is kind of what your parents did, or my parents did, our grandparents did. You wanted to get paid for it, and you wanted to hopefully get good at it. And that could be just a vocation or something you don't even necessarily love at work. It's just you can feed your family and put a roof over their heads. And then my father, the recovering minister, he wrote this book on careers, and he said, well, wait a minute, what if you could also do what you always loving it? It might just mean loving the problems that you're solving or loving the kind of people that you work with, but something motivates you in your work. And then maybe sort of when people sometimes would get older, they would do something that the world needs. So think of those as sort of like four kind of characteristics of work: what you can get paid for, what you're good at, what you love, and what the world needs. And what's happening in a lot of cases is after you've figured out the rules of work that you love and you good and want to have some positive impact in the world, a lot of times what we're seeing is that a lot of, not just young people, but many young people are sort of flipping that stack. They're starting off with some level of passion, and then if of a thing that they really want to do, and there's some problem in the world that they really want to solve, and if they can do that, if they can do what the world needs, then they'll love it. If they love it, then they'll get good at it, and if they get good at it, they'll get paid well. And so that, but increasingly thinking about your motivation in work, the kinds of things that problems that you want to solve, or the kinds of people you want to be around, or the things that you think the world needs. Any one of those can be a motivation. What's important is just to take, I think, the mindset that Christine was talking about, which is that you can take chances, you can make mistakes. You don't have to feel, it's very important to dial down the concern, the worry. Step you take has to be perfect, right? If that's the message that you're getting from older people like me, that, oh, if you don't go to the right school or study the right thing or get in the right industry or get the right jobs or have the right career, then, if you don't do that right now, then things won't be good later on. And that's not the world that we live in. You're probably going to be changing the kind of work that you do. You're going to be developing new skills. There's going to be jobs in 10 to 15 years that Javier was talking about. We don't even know what those job titles are. I can rattle off a couple of, you would just scratch your head and say, but people aren't doing that kind of thing nowadays, but they likely will in the future. So the more you want to do is experiment and develop your own skills, especially your ability to continually solve problems, your ability to continually adapt, your ability to be creative problem solvers, and your ability to have empathy for people that you work with and for customers, and hopefully for the planet as well, that will allow you to be able to continually before.
Great. We lost you. Well, I think we lost you a bit at the end, Gary. But I think what you were mentioning was basically, what are those problems you want to solve in the world, right? What people do you want to be with, and how much empathy do you want to create as well? And speaking of empathy and curiosity, which I know Christine also mentioned it. I mean, curiosity is a drive towards empathy, meaning the more curious you are, the better questions you're gonna make, and the better answers you're gonna get, or the more questions you're gonna get, will bring empathy, or will ignite this vicious cycle of empathy that then will ignite trust, right? And I think the trust is then that beautiful piece that will bring action to things. And as you move with action, then things might happen, as we define. I love the idea of the growth mindset that Christine was pointing out. Christine, can you tell us a bit more of that? Because I think that's also super important as people move along their careers.
Yeah, I love the idea of a vicious cycle of empathy. Just to call that out for a second, I don't think I've ever. It's funny though, because I don't think I've actually really come on a context where more empathy is really a bad thing. It's really what you're doing with what you're learning by putting yourself in other people's shoes, right? And that this growth mindset really is about not thinking of yourself as like a fixed vessel, right? Like you are not just trying to reach some summit that just ends there and the path ends there, right? And Gary's right, like you don't even know what's coming in 10 years. How could you put a finite cap to that, right? And so there's actually a sense of like at the infinite path before you, but also an infinite capacity that you can have within yourself. I also think it's actually important to say, don't push yourself to grow too fast, too hard, because there's a pace. I think there's an element of trying to be paced, right? So technology has made us feel so much urgency. I think we've all heard about social media being very difficult because it makes you feel like you can never turn yourself off and that you're always missing something, right? And I think those elements is not necessarily the kind of growth that we're going for, right? This growth mindset is more about your ability to carry forward the lessons that you're learning, the failures that you're experiencing, and not taking it as, like a fundamental failure of yourself, but maybe you failed because your behavior was a certain way and you can grow out of that, right? Or your knowledge was limited in something and now you know something more, right? So it's more about leaning forwards and not getting held back, thinking that, at some point you're just going to stop learning, right? Like certainly we don't stop learning after school, right? I mean, I think some of us come back to school because we kind of crave a more structured environment. The learning gets harder, in my opinion, after school because there's no rules there either, right? It's like you're not actually even sure what you're learning sometimes when you talk to somebody. If you talk to a manager and they're not necessarily giving you good feedback, maybe you're not even learning the right things anymore, right? Your authority figures could actually be wrong all the time around you, and you actually have to learn to recognize that. You have to start to see when the context and the people around you might not be the right people, and find the right people for yourself. So I think, the more that you can get yourself away from a sense that, there are limitations that you are going to hit, and that, you're only going to be so good at some path. Like if you're thinking about software development and, you could never hope to aspire to be like at Google or something, right? Those are really like limited fixed mindsets, right? And what does it even mean to be aspiring only to Google? So these are all like limitations that we can, sometimes it's societal pressure, sometimes it's something from our past. You never know. Like half of life, I think, is just rooting out where limiting beliefs might be coming from. And so growth mindset is also about finding the sources of all those limiting beliefs and working through them. And that's that personal development, I think, that will really carry you forward into such a dynamic and fast moving world of work.
I think that's brilliant. So I was just going to add, so one way it might be helpful, I think, for especially for some of the young people listening, but I often talk about sort of separating out just so we have a mental picture that there's often sort of three different things that we do in our work, but in our lives as well. Mindset. So have a mind, calling out one of the most important ones, which is a growth mindset. There's plenty of different mindsets. You can have a flexibility mindset. You can have an abundance mindset. You can have a fixed mindset. But growth is a great place to start. So mindset is how we prepare ourselves for situations. It's our mental framing. And if we have a positive mindset, we're likely to believe that we can have a positive outcome. And if we have a negative mindset, we believe things are going to work. Also, a skill set. It's how we each channel our human energies, and you're going to be constantly developing new skills. And then finally, there's a tool set. When we talk about these technologies, it's something as simple as a pen or something as complicated as artificial intelligence software. Each of us as humans, we use tools in the work that we do. So I often call these the three legs of the stool for being able to constantly deal with change: mindset, skill set, classroom. Are you walking into your classmates or your friends? What's your mindset? Are you thinking this is going to be fun, or we're going to solve a really big problem? Or are you thinking, oh, we can't possibly do this, right? That's your mindset. It's how you prepare yourself. And you have complete control over your own mindset. You can change your mindset. The skill set is how you channel your human energies, and it's how well you can solve particular kinds. And it's very, very important to constantly be up to date on what your skill set is, to do what we call self-inventory, where you understand what your own best loved skills are so that you can continually grow and develop in the ones that you want to learn more about. And then finally, with the tool set, just know it's always going to be changing. Today we talk about artificial intelligence, and tomorrow we're going to be talking about things like quantum computing and that sort of thing. It's as Christine was saying, it's used to be Internet of sensors. I mean, it always changes. So it's important to be able to leverage those tools, but to know that those will always change. What is consistent is your mindset and your ability to be able to manage your own mindset and the skills that you develop.
That's great, Gary. I think mindset, as you were talking, and I'm gonna associate mindset with limiting beliefs that Christine was also pointing out, and I think that is also a way of overcoming, right? Because at this point, I'm thinking about social media and pressure, and basically, if we speak, there's this model called the ladder of inference, where it's as to how we build our realities, right? And it's basically like when we're taking a picture, right? So we have we have a little hole which is telling us what reality is, but if we take the camera out of the way, we could see there's a broader picture, a broader context. And basically right now, all this media, all of what we're getting is basically narrowing our reality into one piece, which is being an influencer, being somebody that has to do with social media, where and I'm speaking broadly here, that not be the case for many, but I think that's a big trend. But how can we remove that camera from our eyes so that we can get a broader view of what is out there, right? And I think it speaks also to the mindset of growth, of curiosity, of empathy, and limiting beliefs, which is that challenging aspect of us to how we're interpreting reality that could give us more ideas of what can I do here? What is that problem that I'm really eager to solve within the world, right? So this idea of limiting beliefs, Christine, if you can tell us a bit more, how would you go say, hey, first identify them, recognizing them, and then trying to work with them? I mean, how would you do that?
This is going to be a hard one for me to answer. I think I probably should have put more limits on myself earlier in my career, followed a little too much passion. I think a lot of it is that development of self-awareness of when the negativity is not, like, trying to develop that discernment of when something critical is objectively real, like maybe based on a situation with tangible behavior, with tangible impact on someone else, or an work output that is realistically not valuable, versus just judgment coming from others or yourself, right? And judgments are so often very subjective, especially when they're not grounded in some of the things I just mentioned, like a specific situation, a specific behavior, or some actual outcome or impact that's tangible, right? Someone is just telling you that they don't believe you can do something with no real reasons why, and it's like triggering an internal voice that you may have developed in the past. That's the kind of stuff you have to root out, right? So again, you have to look for that tangible evidence that the inputs that you're getting from external and maybe your own self-talk, right, have some basis to it. I think that is, to be truthful, probably work to be done over at least a decade, maybe. It's like a journey of internal work to kind of make sure that I think these external work decisions hopefully are being built on a really strong foundation, right? Where you're not limiting yourself artificially. And so with limiting beliefs, you don't start internal, then you're never really I think you're gonna reach that point, 10, 15 years in, where you realize you were pursuing the wrong things, right? Still around me now, I find so many people making these like complete left turns. And again, I'm still not saying that you shouldn't experience what you need to experience. It's the journey for everybody, right? I do think that there could have been a little bit more alignment with what you truly care about earlier, if you don't end up following kind of the wrong signals for yourself earlier on, right? There was another thing, Javier, that I was thinking of while you were talking, and I'm gonna have to bring it back later because it's not about limiting beliefs, but it is something I want to say. But I'll have to let the conversation carry on, and it's niggling in the back of my brain now. So.
All right.
So
All right.
I was going to talk a little bit about the limiting beliefs thing too, because we can't see our beliefs. We don't have a Fitbit for our beliefs. There's nothing to tell us what it is. So I was just going to offer a couple of quick insights that I hope are useful, especially for the younger people in the audience. And so it turns out there's all sorts of really fascinating mechanics in our heads. And we can't see them, we don't know them. Their brains work in some really fascinating ways, but there's some pretty predictable ways that a lot of our brains work. I just developed a video course on mindset and the brain with a good friend of mine, Dr. Evan's brilliant at talking about brain's work. So one of the first things to remember about your brain is that the brain really likes to have safety first. If you're thinking about taking a risk or you're thinking about doing something, your brain's automatic reaction often is, no, don't do that. So our brains we do all these really complicated sort of calculuses when we make decisions, and we often sort of make up the reasons afterwards. But it's essentially this balance of whether or not it's a safe thing to do, whether or not we want to take a risk or not. And then it's important when we're thinking about taking chances, then, well, how do you not have self-limiting beliefs that make you essentially say no to everything, right? So, and there's a couple of kind of interesting sort of techniques to do. The first is, in many cases, we don't feel like we have the power to change something, or we're did not turn out great. And so there's a couple things you can do. The first is ask yourself, how much control over this do I have? You know, in a lot of cases, it's not zero. It might not be 100%, but it's somewhere in between. So are there things that you can do to be able to take even small steps? Because that's something really that each of us as humans, once we start trying something, even the smallest amount, you know, you have a big assignment that you have to do and you keep pushing it off and pushing it off. Well, why don't you just take 5 minutes? Just a little bit of time. And what we find is once we get over that hump, we stop kicking the can down the road, or we stop avoiding that one thing that we might have done that would give us an opportunity for growth, then we learn, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. And so it's important to be able to understand, sort of hack your own brain, and to see when you feel that you are limiting yourself. You're saying, oh, no, I couldn't possibly go work at that company, or I couldn't possibly learn how to do that kind of work. Wait a minute, what if I talk to people who are doing it and I ask them, have people like me ever sort of done this kind of thing? And what you often find is that there are routes, there are alternatives, there are paths that are non-traditional. The group, nonprofit called Opportunity at Work, they call people who go through these alternative paths stars, skilled through alternative routes, not necessarily always following, you know, the straight line that everybody did, but taking different risks or following. That's really, really helpful when you start thinking about self-limiting behaviors, and instead go find out more about it, gather more information, talk to people, try little steps. And any one of those might be a technique that will actually help you to be able to take a first step.
I love what you're saying, Gary, and particularly, you know, talk to people, and the action of talking to people says a lot, right? But I think there's a very important part of talking to people, which is the listening part, right? And I think a question that I would ask you is, what makes you a good listener?
Go for it, Christine.
That's the home run to hit here, right? Well, we're going back to empathy being the vicious cycle. Yeah, and then you know, this distinction between listening and hearing, right? No, so I think I probably talked about the statistic earlier this year, so it's fresh in my mind. I think there's something like, I don't know, 30 to 40% of us are listening just to react, or we're listening to think about what to say next, right? And I think a little bit of that is also in the you're afraid to leave silence, or you're afraid to not appear smart, or you know that there's some bad outcome that comes from not being able to say something immediately, right? Whereas I think when you kind of develop that ability to pause, think for a moment about what someone's saying, and then bring your best question or your best, you know, actual reflection on what they said. There's this, you know, actually, Gary, to your point, I love that you're talking about brains, because I actually studied neuroscience. So there, you know, your brain actually, when you pause, you are allowing yourself to not react as much with like just a feeling, but with like more cognition, right? You're giving your brain a chance to bring more of what maybe something in your instinct is also bringing something forward, right? And then you can actually have deeper, more authentic, intelligent conversations. Yeah, and I think that's so critical. Like the more you can actually have deeper, authentic conversations with every person that you feel a sense of trust with, which is like a whole nother subject actually, as you're developing your people, right? Your people that you want to have around you as you leave school, go to different schools, or have different phases. Javier actually do remember the other thing I want to say now, so I'll say that in a second. So the more you can find those right people, I think the more that they're actually gonna, I think of them as actually like good foils and mirrors to hold up to you. Because again, it comes back to like, sometimes it's hard for us to have that self-awareness. So the more that you've actually been able to express yourself authentically, bring your real questions, real fears, you have more people who can also work on the problems with you, right? So work, I guess this is another point about going into work, is this is not some hero's journey that you're supposed to figure out by yourself, right? You're not you may be, you know, the star in your own head, and then so you have all the pressures on you, and all the achievements that you're supposed to go achieve. But I think so many of us early on think this is like, we have this pressure to like make all the accomplishments happen ourselves, right? In reality, I think the further along you go, the more you realize how much is out of your control, and the more you realize how much others can do for you, and how much others can see that you can't see, perspectives that they have that you don't have, and how much people are just willing to give. Like, there are so many people who really want to help, and all you have to do is ask, but ask for real, right? Not um, don't have like a timid conversation where you're worried that they're gonna not want to talk to you, or they think your question's stupid, but ask for real. Um, and Javier, the other thing that I just wanted to mention is actually this, maybe, I think, just to put it in the context for a second, that there really are these like seasons in your life though, where I think some of this is inevitable. Like, we're giving all this advice today, right? We say, in a sense, it's like do's and don'ts, things to be aware of, but some of this you'll go through. Give yourself some grace through that, right? Because you're going to experience these difficult moments, and then so there are seasons of certain kinds of growing where you're going to get through that difficult moment, and then other seasons where maybe you will be ready to be more of that solo hero because you've learned so much before and you found all these right people. And so again, I guess I just keep thinking it is going to knit together, it will work out, but I don't think you need to predefine how it's supposed to work out so much at each moment along the way.
No, I think that's brilliant. So I want to maybe give, especially some of our young listeners, a couple of uh, insights about adults and about, especially as Javier was saying, but really listening. So the first thing is, what one of the secrets, one of the things that we've told you that is, or at least implied, that is not true, is that adults have it all together. Like, we figured it out, we know exactly what we're doing. No, it's not like that at all. So you feel uncertain, they feel uncertain too, right? So that's the first thing, is don't give all that power to adults, because in many cases, figuring it out. Second is that we often like to talk about ourselves. Adults often like to, especially about careers, especially about their work. So it turns out that a very wise man, a friend of my father's, he came up with a set of questions, 4 questions. And I say you should talk to people, what I mean is, like, learn about their work, learn about their jobs. And so one of the opportunities is to figure out, how do you crack the code? Like, how do you start the process? How do you get them to open up? This man named Daniel Perot in France, or in Switzerland, he said there's 4 questions. The first question is, how did you get into your line of work? Like, what is your job and how did you get there? And we find out that a lot of adults will say, well, everybody else followed a very traditional path, but I went through these steps. So the first thing is, how did you get into this line of work? And then you ask them, what do you like about your work? What do you dislike? A lot of people, they've got very feelings about the work that they're doing. And then, so that's a really easy way. Just those first 3 questions are a really easy way to sort of think of them as fire starters. How did you get in this line of work? What do you like? What do you dislike? And then, if you really start to enjoy that, start to enjoy, like, the process of interviewing adults, learning about their work, then the 4th question is, listen, can you let me know, introduce me to 1 or 2 other people that do similar kinds of work? And so that is just giving good adult, learning how to be able to have those conversations. And if you're picturing, maybe they're not quite as certain as they're coming across, that's really helpful. And then if you get them talking about themselves, you're going to find that's a great icebreaker. It's a much, much easier way to be able to start to learn more about the world of work that you might never have learned otherwise.
That's great, Gary. Great advice. Great for questions, and to those questions, I would like to open the forum. I think it's been already over text on the screen. But if there are any questions from the audience for Gary and for Christine, please, it's now time to let us know. We'll be very happy to address them here. So please feel free to put some out. Okay, I'm getting here Okay, I think I'm getting some texts. There's not many questions, so we can keep on with a great conversation we're having, and we'll address those questions as they pop up. So,
Okay, so I wanted to touch base on something really quickly, Javier, that you mentioned earlier. So we're young. As Christine was saying, we want to take chances, want to make mistakes. We kind of don't know the rules of work. There are pressures, especially if you're thinking about going from high school into college or from college into the world of work. We get a lot of messages. Sometimes those are from our parents. Sometimes it's from other adults. And I'm not going to tell you that don't. So I'm often known, especially when I've spent time with young people, I'm often called Uncle G. So don't tell your parents that Uncle G told you not to listen to them. That is not the message. But a friend of mine told me that he gave me an example of pressure from his parents. He grew up in India, and he was having a conversation with his mother when he was in high school, and he was thinking of not going to college. And his mother said, "So my son, let me tell you, you have three career options: doctor, engineer, loser." So no pressure. He chose engineer. But why do parents do that? It's because they see a war certainty. The fog is so thick down the highway. In the past, it used to be pretty reliable that you could choose these different kinds of jobs. You could be a lawyer for decades. You could be, there's all these jobs that you could have done in the past, and it's not certain that those jobs will stay the same going forward. So parents are concerned. They're worried. They want us to succeed. So they often are going to choose to give us advice or to urge us down a path that falls learn. Remember the older rules of work were getting paid for it and doing something that you're good at. And in the old rules, in the past years, that probably was the way you could be successful, but they don't know what it's going to be like going forward. So first off, it's really important to just feel that you understand that that's their motivation. They want the best for us, but also they're not as prepared in many cases. Many parents aren't as prepared for understanding how those seismic changes are affecting the world of work. So that's an opportunity for a conversation between the things that you're of curiosity about, that you want to learn more about, and where the opportunities might be. And that's actually I think an opening in terms of a conversation with parents for you both to learn more about where there might be new work opportunities in areas that they didn't even know about. And so again, Uncle G's not telling you don't listen to your parents. What I'm saying instead is think of that as an opportunity for a dialogue, to be able to learning process of where some of the future. I hope everybody involved, you and your parents, will all buy into this mindset that this is just your next step. It's not to choose a career that you're going to be doing for the next 40 or 50 years. Because I can't tell you any single job that I can think of that is going to be the same, even in the next 10 or 15 years. So instead, it's about what's your next step. And that should allow us to dial down some of the emotion involved in the process.
thank you, Gary. I think that's actually a great way of start closing this session as time comes to end. And in this as I can pick up all these pieces of conversation, I would just say, within this ever changing, uncertain landscape, I think the mindset is very important. The curiosity part of things, not taking things as serious as they appear. Also, I think humor might be also an interesting perspective as you walk through the path, right? And considering some of your words, Christine, as well, is motivation is a big piece, and what is that passion that drives you? I would guess, this idea between meaning and versus meaning making, I think that's a big way that I would like to address this way of navigating, right? We could always be thinking of that moment or that thing that I'm seeking towards meaning, versus this first step gives me or gave me meaning, right? It doesn't have to be always striving for something bigger. It could be this very simple one step that is meaningful, for that moment, for that place, for that context, even, right, of changing the world, or getting extra dollars to, put a roof over my head, or buy something for my girlfriend. I don't know, right? So I think there's also this point of how can we make meaning in every step of the way, rather than seeking meaning and then getting lost in the way. I don't know if that speaks to a way of closing, and if you have some final remarks, that would be great.
Yeah. I think it's about holding both that short and long term, right? The long term is the series of things that all these seasons, these arcs that you're going through, what they knit into. And I think that's, as Gary is saying, you're not going to be doing the same thing for 40 years. So why would you try to project what you're going to do for 40 years as a career, right? Instead, how can you take maybe that prototyping approach, right? Over the next 1 to 3 years, what might be some of the things that are meaningful for you to do right now, right? To your point, Javier. And I think this actually needs to be even flexible. Like, it's not a bad thing to think, maybe for the next year I want to make some money, right? And I just want to see what that means to me. I think when you use design thinking around your work and your life and trying to decide what is your view of what work means to you, what's your view of what your life means to you, what you want in it, none of these have to be permanent answers. I think they should be taken on those shorter time scales to think what matters to me right now, right? And if it matters to you to make some money right now, just do it, right? You're not saying that matters to you for the next 10 years. You need to know what that's going to look like in the context of who you are and how you'll feel about it after those couple of years, right? And if instead it turns out, okay, I took that job on Wall Street and then now I'm a recovering consultant or a recovering investment banker, then that's fine, right? So then you might swing to the other side and say, I'm going to do social impact, right? And actually, we see this around us. And those are both meaningful things, right? Those are both meaningful things that you did, that I think it does come back to that learning and that growing, and ultimately, you know, trying to find that North Star for yourself, I think, is something really important as you construct the arc of your career and your work.
Wonderful.
No, absolutely. No, I think that's wonderful, Christine. So, and I'd also add, it's really important to be thinking about. I want to reaffirm for everybody, especially for all the young people, is you are an absolutely unique human being. There is nobody on the planet with your same mix of skills and experiences and interests and hopes for the future, and you're absolutely unique. The problem is that to each of us, we're kind of think of us like a little bit above the waterline, that we see about our own skills or interests, and there's all this human potential that's below the waterline. So part of the great process that you can go through is to just continually learn more about yourself as you're also learning more about the world of work, and that is a journey. As Christina said, it's like it's the next step in the journey. It might be just to make money, but it's a journey. We're all going through that journey. Know what the future is when we're experiencing it. We can only look back, especially when we're older, and see what we did decide to do. But what you want is options. What's really important is to continually be thinking about what are the different potential paths that I might follow, so that you feel you are able to make a choice between different alternatives. And so that's what I would encourage, especially, as Christine was talking about a growth mindset, I would encourage you to be continually thinking about how you can grow and learn. And then what are the different options you might be able to understand, so that you choose the one that you feel is most optimal for you at any given time in your life.
Gary, Christine, this has been a great conversation. I would just add a piece of just have fun in the process, and enjoy it as well, because you never know where it will take you, right? So I'm really and deeply grateful for this conversation, this bits of pieces of advice which are invaluable. So thank you so much. Hopefully we get another chance to have a conversation in different forum, maybe here in Boston, anywhere. So guys, if you want to see more of this, please sign up for the summer. We would love to have you here at the Richi Innovation Camp. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Good luck to all of you. Be well.